Welcome everyone to our workshop and seminar this afternoon, the launch of the Missioner Network, which is very exciting. I feel a little bit like a captain of an airline who wants to say something like, I know you had a choice of other things to do today, and that includes the fact that Canada is kicking off in its first World Cup game in 36 years. But as I like to think it, the problems that a Missioner Network might be addressing go a lot further back than 36 years. So this is even more relevant and timely what we're doing here today, even if the numbers who are able to gather here in person do not reflect that. We are recording this, and we're going to make this available through the various social media channels and websites and so forth. And again, this is part of our series on Reimagining Contemporary Ministries for a renewing church, and all the parts of that phrase, which are a mouthful, are really, really important. And I think we'll see today how this new missioner network, which will be cross-country and sharing good practice on new, innovative, creative ways of drawing on our deep wells of Christian tradition for the mission of the church today, how they connect in with that. So I'm going to turn things over now to our panel, and to specifically Rev Canon Darcey Lazerte, who will be moderating this for us today, and ask you to open in prayer and to get us underway.
Well, thank you very much, Jeffrey, for that introduction. Let's just have a moment of quiet as we collect our thoughts and prayers. Loving God, we do give thanks for this time together, for the gift of Trinity College, for the privilege of being a part of your mission in this world. We ask that your Spirit guide us now and always. And we pray this in Christ's name. Amen. We'll begin with introductions to ourselves, and we'll start with Bishop Patrick and Reverend Wu.
I am Bishop Patrick Wu, and I'm a retired bishop, and I highly recommend that occupation, retirement. God was just asking me what I do. I have two official titles. The first is that I'm the senior lecturer in pastoral theology in Minghua College in Hong Kong. So I teach there. I teach theology there. I teach on Zoom, which is not my preferred mode. And the last time I was there in 2019, stayed away because of the riots, and then stayed away for longer than I thought because of the pandemic. But I just talked to the principal on Monday, and I guess he wants me back, so I still have a job. Secondly, I'm the honor assistant of All Saints Congregation in Markham. After having avoided doing Chinese ministry all my ministry life, it's got a wonderful, humorous way that is almost exclusively what I do now. Oh, by the way, I'm married. We have 3 grown children.
My name is Garfield. I'm working right now as a half-time director for St. Luke's in Oakville, which is a very institutional church, traditional institutional church. The other half job is called regional missioner, which connected with our name today, Missioner Network. It's a missionary work in the region. I think, let me give you a picture of this way. I used to have a brain of working with the institutional church preach in English. The other half mixed with the language, Mandarin language or English, and doing the missional work. Do a lot of visiting and church planting work, basically, like so. And that's the picture. And I met Canon Darcey, which was my supervisor, I think 5 years ago. And Bishop Patrick is at the first stage of consultant for the Chinese ministry in Oakville, and with Bishop Michael, and supported by Bishop, I think it's current Bishop Niagara, and we have been working for 5 years. And that's what we have right now, and we try to build up this connector. We want to learn the wider world and what's happening in other places, and try to help each other to learn each other in the various ministries. And I'm happily married, and my wife is a high school teacher. We have 2 children.
Well, thanks, Bishop Patrick and Garfield. I have to smile, as Garfield said. I was a supervisor when he started out, and we met a few years before that. You were a student as well. But he worked at the church I was rector at, and then he helped at a church that was close to us, and he was doing missionary work just back then. And he had a great line then: I'm half-time at St. Simon's, half-time at St. Aidan's, and half-time as a missionary. And so I think he's at the different end of the spectrum than Bishop Patrick. Not quite retirement, hands full, little kids, but he is fantastic and has just so much energy and dedication to missional work and outreach and just reaching new people with the faith and exposing to that and inviting them into the church in new and exciting ways. My name is Darcey. I'm a clergy person with the Anglican Diocese of Niagara. I've done over 25 years of parish ministry. Presently, I am an adjunct faculty here at Trinity College, and part of the team that is getting this missionary network going. As well, I'm happily married most of the time, and we have 3 children at various stages of life, from, I guess the youngest is 13 and the oldest is 23, so along that spectrum. So that's a little bit about all the 3 of us. Just so you have a little context in terms of where we come from, our life and work experience, and just in terms of, I think, why we have a passion behind this and the place that it can have, I think, within the Anglican Church of Canada, and perhaps even beyond, but we'll aim small for now. In terms of what's going on, why a missioner network? I think it's no secret that things in the church have changed in the last quarter century, and even before that, certainly in the 25 years that I've been doing, that I did parish ministry. There's a sense that things are different now. Some of it is the reality of decline. Some of it is the cultural context within which we live. Some of it is just the church sees itself differently and isn't what it once was. Change is inevitable. It happens. It's part of life. It's part of the fabric of society. The church isn't the same as it was 100 years ago or 200 years before that or 3, and it's changed throughout time. And I do think we're at one of these moments, especially within the North American context, where we're facing another change. And one of the things that's happened is there's been a lot of talk of missional church. There's been a discovery, what we would call Missio Dei. It's God's work in the world, and we, the church, are just a part of that. It's not the church mission. And so we've gotten away from some of the ways we used to do things, which was a lot of institutional maintenance. I know when I started out as a curate 26, 27 years ago, you learned how to do a wedding and a funeral. You learned how to preach on Sunday and celebrate the Eucharist, run a Bible study, how the various administrative organizations of the church worked, and then you had to raise some money to make sure it all went. And there's still some of that goes on, but there's been a lot of different influences lately. Lots of people have realized that that's not the be-all and end-all. It's not about keeping buildings going, but there is a whole movement of the Spirit within our midst, which is meant for us to look outward and not to look after ourselves. And so one of the things that's developed is there's been missioners developed, and some have been sponsored by dioceses, some have come out of parishes themselves, and people do ask, as we've been getting this going, well, what is a missioner? I work in a food bank. Isn't that missional? And I would say it's absolutely missional, but it's not really what we're looking at in terms of what a missioner is. And the reason I say this is because there's a great line, David Bosch, who formed a lot of my thesis work. He talks about evangelism being a part of mission, but not all mission is evangelism. We need to make a delineation between the two. And certainly we want Missio Dei to be part of God's mission, but that active and that practice of evangelism needs to be identified as the church in terms of its action, recovered in many places, and needs to be done in a very deliberate manner. So a missioner is really someone more that is on the ground, is deliberate in terms of reaching out to new communities, is invitational, not coercive, has a sense of who it's talking to, why it's talking to, and why we're going about that. And in the case of what Garfield and I worked on, and we'll get to a little more of that later, it's very specific in terms of who it speaks to and how it goes about doing that. So what our goal is to develop a missioner network where we bring across the missioners from various parts of Canada and beyond to provide them with support in areas and challenges that are commonly faced across the board, because in our casual conversation, a lot of the same themes keep coming up. We'll get to a little more detail of that later. But really that's what we're about. We want to launch a missioner network, which is a gathering point for missioners across Canada that are facing these new challenges in the church and these new opportunities in the church with creativity, I think with a sense of faithfulness and with some excitement. I think that's enough of an introduction to what we're getting going. Is there anything you want to add to that at this stage, Garfield? We'll turn it over to Bishop Patrick for a minute.
About the whole idea of mission?
Yeah,
Can I tell a story?
you can do whatever you like.
Oh, I like that. I never had that freedom when I was a bishop.
Less freedom as a bishop than anything else, I think.
So one of the hats I used to wear is the coordinator of the Evangelism and Church Growth Initiative of the Anglican Communion. And that has given me opportunity to meet people who are interested in mission throughout the Communion, from Kenya and New Zealand and Australia and so on, Malaysia. Two things. One of them is this is during the heightened conflict within the Anglican Communion, and there are a lot of people around the table who hold different views on the issue, but never once did we argue because we're too busy talking about mission and evangelism. So I think you need to hear that. And in fact, that's one of the highest, the most referred to topic in the Indaba process of Lambeth 2008. So gather around, and oh, these people are interested in evangelism, even more than sex, which is quite amazing, right? And the other thing is that as a result of that, I went to, I think it's 2012 or something, one of those Anglican consultative councils that met in I think Auckland, New Zealand, and I got Archbishop Johnson to pay for my plane ticket to give a presentation about evangelism and church growth. And I wanted to do a little bit of research on evangelism in New Zealand. So I was staying at St. John's College in Auckland, which is like a big church with a huge foundation. They sang the church is one foundation, and it's actually St. John's College in New Zealand. So I went and I interviewed one student. I said, what's your view on evangelism? She says, oh, I'm not interested in that. We're not into that. We like helping people. Okay. So it seems to me that what you refer to as the kind of the old ways, the chaplaincy, the maintenance, is quite endemic, not just in Canada, but throughout the world. And I'm just delighted that certainly at Trinity College and also in the Diocese of Niagara, that effort is started. It's actually not the norm everywhere in the Anglican Communion. I myself am a first-generation Christian. I was baptized and churched in the Anglican Church in Hong Kong. So it is possible, and I'm glad you're doing it.
So Garfield and I will share now a little bit of the story of what got us to this place. He'll give an update in terms of where things are at now, and I'll just speak very briefly in terms of how we got started. Joe Aslin, the rector of St. Cuthbert's in Oakville, had Garfield as a student, and he had Bishop Patrick Wu in to give some conversation and some guidance and some feedback in terms of how that was going, and they brought together the local clergy. I was at that meeting, and I don't know if Bishop Wu knows that, and at the end of it he said, if you don't do it, no, someone else will, referring to a different denomination, and that struck me, so I sent an email off to, I should say the bishop, but the bishop's secretary, because that's how you really communicate with him, just saying that if we can help at St. Simon's, we'd be happy to. Alan Hayes, who's a professor across the street at Wycliffe, was an honoree of mine, and he'd said to me years before, he goes, Darcy, you don't know what a treasure St. Simon's is. I've been around the diocese at a lot of churches, and yours is the most multicultural I've seen. So I sent the email saying that, we don't particularly have a lot of Chinese representation. We have a few people that are out, but we're quite multicultural, and if we could help in any way we can, we'd be happy to. So Bishop Michael Bird at the time, he was our bishop, called me in and said, I'm interested in getting St. Simon's involved. how much can you spend? We had a conversation about that, and we launched the missioner part of Garfield's job out of St. Simon's in Oakville and beyond a little bit, but in Oakville primarily, and really made a concerted effort to work on that. And we did so together basically until the pandemic hit. And that changed things, of course, and we're still adjusting to that, but that was our start. So thank you, Bishop Wu, for that word.
It was fun. It was fun.
You want to tell them where we're at today?
You want to tell it? Okay. So that's where we started, and the missional work is a kind of vague at the very beginning. So even I myself, I keep consulting with the, I think we invited Bishop Patrick, we came to the Oakville again another time, and keep chatting with the Canon Darcey and other parish priests. I think that people think what's a missionary, because even the diocese, they defined the missional idea. So I even went out of the Anglican circle, go to the other churches, and at that time Bishop Susan told me that learn whatever you can, go to other the local Chinese churches, other places, get their material, see how they run the church, how they do the evangelism work, and which big different with us. So we tried a lot of things, and some not so successful, some were successful, and I think it's basically I'm the one who run the groundwork all the time and do a lot of visiting, receive all the reflections from that part. I think in the recent, especially the pandemic time, because of the church, actually I think that's an advantage for the missional work. So we find that the strength of missional work is we connect to people. Because of church closing is a huge thing. So last year I preached to the empty pews for the whole church. So which is sad, but I find that the strength of missionary work is we already built the relationship with the personnel. So the ministry happens in the people's home, in the outside of church. I think a big portion of that. The institute church, I think a fair size of 70-80% of ministry happen in the church, but the missional kind of 70-80% outside of church. So that's part of, I think it's a difference. I'm still working on that, I'm still keep trying some things may not be successful, but for the missional work, can feel it's different with the institutional training. I think that's why I want to bring this to learn each other. I believe there's some other good things happening in I think I quote the words of the spirit work somewhere we don't even know. Yeah, so it's why we build up this, we want to learn each other, and I think reinforce or kind of we gather the strength in each other and find a new way of to run the ministry in our time and follow the Spirit.
So it would seem thank you very much, Garfield. It would seem a natural spot if anyone had any questions at this stage, because that's the background of what got us going and what the perspective of where we're working from. And if there's any questions at this time before we speak to the areas we'd like to cover off and how we will move forward. Yes.
When you talk about the areas, I'm not quite clear what the content is of missionary work, but perhaps that's what you're going to do now in terms of carrying on from your side?
Yeah, we'll get into the content
Okay.
next.
Okay.
But just to paint the picture, because as we've talked about it with people, some people understand and are speak the language, if you will, and others are like, oh, tell me more, I don't get this, and what's this mean, and what's this mean? So.
Well, you did make a reference to missionary work and evangelism, but again, I'm not quite sure what the distinction is between the two.
Maybe I can answer the question. If you're familiar with the 5 marks of mission of the Anglican Communion, I think it's evangelism and discipleship. Evangelism, baptism, I think, social justice, reconciliation, and care for an environment. I mean, it's roughly that. And I think that, as Darcey said, a lot of people are saying, the problem with evangelism, which is to share the good news of Jesus, to establish a relationship. between that person and Jesus. I think, you know, we joke about either we don't do evangelism, which is my New Zealand student response, which could be just a Wycliffe or Trinity response as well, or everything I do is evangelism. And in the 5 marks of mission, it's very clear. It says that evangelism, this idea of introducing others to Christ, is the cutting edge of mission. So this is where, in a sense, it's not the first meeting between the church and the world, but it's actually when it makes inroads, at least according to the framers of those five marks of mission.
Thank you. That was a great answer. Are there any other questions? So Garfield has reflected in terms of what's happening on the ground. There's been a fair number of casual conversations between him and others, missioners that are on the ground, and there's been some common questions that have come up, from paying for it to what language do you worship in, to what's appropriate music, to what about children and youth, to how do you relate to the denomination that you're a part of. Most of the time it's Anglican, but as he said, he's gone to talk to other people in other Christian traditions as well. And so these are common challenges that I think missioners have had going forward. And what we'd really like to do is listen a little bit more in terms of, as we build that network, to hear back about what are people's concerns, what are the challenges on the ground, what are the successes, and what are the failures. I know in talking to Garfield, 2 of the things he's really worked hard, and I think we could tell a little bit about that now, would be English coffee and bilingual worship.
About that. Yeah. So I think it's an intention for especially for the missional work. We go to some special, it's immigrant people, or some people kind of speak the same mother language. We all know when we move to a new country, there's cultural adoption, there's whole things you need to accommodate. Before that, we have a idea of, okay, come to us, join our church, we will help you. Right now, I think finding the missional work is more like, so I'll come to you, help you. So there's 2 ministry I started from. One is called English Coffee. It's in the church called St. Anne's, just I think 4 kilometers to here, in the west part, with Father Gary. We pick up the idea from another, in the conferences, that's Toronto, they organize that. It's helping people to practice their English, and I think feel it's homey when they join the church. So the English coffee involves, I keep doing that until now. I still doing that in the Oakville, but it evolves from the different type. So we used to host the English coffee in the church. Right now we do the English coffee, move to the people's home. It's more like a small Bible study, getting to know people. And beyond that, and a lot of people go to the new country, they're looking for new friends, looking for new career. And beyond that, based on English coffee, we have another ministry called a calling career. So help people. We invited the different priest, doctor, a lot of new parents, they're looking for all kinds of different jobs. We invite people to introduce that, which in Oakville, I did the workshop in the social media. The first gathering, we gathered over 300 persons. And there's these people, and I invited, I think it's a Christian doctor, and it's from a Chinese background. He speaks French, English, and Mandarin. And he even helped the church. Okay, our church help this, and we'll help the church back. They even call these people, please give some support of church. We finished the gathering people, express idea of connect people together and the Christianity, and invite them to the church, and even stewardship. Got some support from the people gathered. This is the English Coffee Ministry. I think originally started from Trinity College, the conference organized by the school. We brought to the parish, and we keep growing going to that direction. Regards to the bilingual service, which was really struggling because of in OPO, there's already, even we started, even Bishop Patrick and the Canon Darcey mentioned this, if we don't do that, and someone else do that. Before us, 5 years early, there's already Chinese church, they do the church planting, they already have the strong group there, but they worship, they only use Mandarin, one language. And I was struggling, what should we do? So because we run the English coffee room, I always encourage people at least learn some English and the communication do this way. So we started the bilingual service at St. Simon's. I think at the very beginning, I find the only preaching part is, we don't do the translation, we only preaching part in Mandarin preaching, but all others we printed in the screen. This is English, this is Mandarin, but I find quite fair size of people, they love that kind of service. So we keep doing that. Even during the pandemic, we moved it online. People still keep going with that. Right now, we're about to set the second bilingual service in the church in Oakville. The first one is the Saturday in the St. Luke's right now. It's what it looks like. 10 o'clock service, we have 2 space. We're lucky have 2, not this big, but 2. This is the church we worship in the traditional way. This one we do the bilingual service, but after that we mingle together. So we can see a lot of people love that. Even people only speak a few, it's basically they still there's a language barrier, it's a challenge there, but they still love the feeling of a big smile. People use a different language with each other, getting to know each other. And the bilingual worship is I can feel the drive is keep growing, so which is very unique in our town. So I think that we're about to set a second one. It's still, and in regards to it's not just worship itself. I find that the missional work is just connected with it. This is a faith formation. Most of people join the Bible study group, which we run in their mother language, in Mandarin. They love to join the bilingual service or join the English service. So which we connected the kind of community formation, faith formation, and also mission formation, 3 parts of that. And we keep getting people. The pandemic hit this ministry hard, but which surprised me is the number didn't go down, it's actually going up because of the online, people reconnected with each other. So I think this is 2 major ministry we are doing right now. It's one is called bilingual service, the other one is Canon Darcey, it's English coffee. Right now it's changed to another name, but it's basically the same thing.
Would you like to add anything, Bishop Wu?
Oh, it just reminded me that that's very similar to what we did in St. Timothy's Asian Court. That would be in the late 90s. We call it Welcome to Asian Court. And so same thing, people come but not just Mandarin speaking people, but Iranians and so on. I got to tell you 2 stories about that. One is that being very Anglican, we were very hesitant to impose our beliefs on other people. So we talked about everything except Christianity. And then the people got, I speak kind of Mandarin, but he will laugh at me if I started. So people cornered me and says, well, what are you? I mean, are you Eastern Orthodox? Because there are a lot of people from northern China, border with Russia. Are you Catholic? Or what are you? I said, well, we're Anglicans. And I says, well, why didn't you tell us more about Christianity? So it's the people who are not Christians asking us to talk about Christianity. So we did, and we had this rule then. Every 4th Tuesday, which is when we meet, we will talk about Christ. And so we use a thing called stories that shape us, or something like that. And we tell basic Christian stories: Easter story, Christmas story, creation story, Noah, and etc. Very, very simple. And the important thing is that we teach people how to pray. So that's one story, is that this shyness is often more from Christians, from Anglicans, than from those we are trying to reach, which is really funny, but in a sad, funny way. Second is that then we start to become friends, and then we start to ask, so what do you think of us? And then you think a lot. Oh, we think a lot. Like, what we do is not really intellectual. Says, no, that's what we mean. What they meant with we thank a lot, T-H-A-N-K. So apparently the people of St. Timothy who are thanking people are thanking God and thanking people for life. I thought it's not a bad reputation to have, you know. So again, I think this idea is great. I mean, you know, when you say we go out to other places, it's like pizza places. We deliver. You know, it's not necessarily a restaurant. We deliver. That's what we want to ask.
So I hope as you've listened to Bishop Wu and Garfield that you've got a sense of what's happening out there. And there's lots of these, I'll call them little stories all over the place. And there's a lot of, to use a cliche, recreating the wheel. And you hear the same stories over and over again. So what we basically want to do is provide a place for missioners to connect, to share stories, the challenges they face, to have, they're coast to coast. We can't get together in person, but God invented this thing called Zoom, so we can meet together now and talk. So just those times to connect in person, and then just the various other resources that can be provided through email communications and online resources. And really, it's not an exhaustive list, but I wrote down some of the things that we want to touch on. First is the stories and the initiatives of what's going on out there. It's inspiring, and I think the work and the ministry that these people are doing is wonderful, and it should be captured. And I do think you learn in sharing stories with one another, both the successes and the failures and the challenges. And as I smiled with Garfield a couple weeks ago, I said, who would have thought the pandemic would show up and change everything you did? But in somehow recognizing the difficulty and tragedy of that, the initiative has been able to work through and has learned from that, and it's opened other and new opportunities. So we want to talk about stories and initiatives. Second, we don't want to forget that we are a Christian community, and how we worship matters. And questions to be asked and experiences to work through are things like in-person versus remote, hybrid, what languages are used, what music is used, the place of children and young people within that. So lots of people have experiences. As you get a sense, as you've listened to this, missionary is targeting certain communities in a good way to bring them together and to ultimately, God willing, have a home with the Anglican Church of Canada or wherever they live, and to be a part of that. So get the stories out there, talk about worship and what's appropriate and how it works. And then with other things that have come up, our intergenerational ministry, children and youth ministry, stewardship was mentioned before, the practical reality of finding space. It's one thing to find space on a Sunday morning. What about activities during the week, and how do you find space where it's limited? And then there is lots of on-the-ground challenges that come up beyond just COVID and other things like that. But with any new initiatives, things can happen that are unexpected and challenging, and I think everyone can learn together. So our hope is to build this network over the next few months, bring the missioners together, provide some resources, look at these areas that we've talked about today, and to listen to what other challenges are out there and see what resources we can provide for that. Do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think it's I was and I am still Trinity students, and I received I think the best education I could ever imagine in this school. But still, when we go to the groundwork, I find the missional work, the institutional work, I think it's fantastic. I think basically I learned everything being a rector, running a church. But for the missional work, I find that there's still something more we can add on. for example, like the worship-wise, how we set up the worship, what kind of language we should use. Right now, I myself preach regularly in Mandarin and English, which I intentionally practice myself. And I have a lay missionary work with me, and I think this year we have 3 students and potentially another 2. If they want to go through the missional channel, basically I give a report to the seniors group, to my bishop, and I told them each missionary, they have to practice preaching regularly in 2 languages, which build the bridge for English congregation and the missionary, the congregation you're going to outreach, and make both sides feel so they can have the spiritual growth, they have the spiritual formation. So for the Bible study wise, I think the group, you can use the mother language, help them go deeper for the faith, but for the preaching part, you have to learn both. And also missionary is visiting. We used to call it pastoral visiting. Right now it's kind of not only pastoral visiting. Visiting will be the big portion of the missionary work. So that's a little bit changing. I'm still exploring. In the future, I think maybe with Father Jeffrey, with the Trinity College, with other missionaries, we can work together and have a clear definition how to train the future missionary, how to make them in the groundwork, have everything equipped. So I had a lot of support from the I think basically I feel blessed. I got all the support from the diocese and from the school, but I still want to learn from, I think, the groundwork. We can connect each other. Like I mentioned, gather the force together, get the spirit together, get Jesus behind us, and train the next generation of missionary and make church. I think it's totally different. Yeah.
Any final thoughts to add, Bishop Yu?
I hope it's not final yet, but I can't agree with Garfield more. I think it's very wise, your emphasis on the 2 languages, not just for Mandarin, but for any language that we would need. I used to teach across the street intercultural ministry, which is related but not the same. And I think as a bishop, we struggle with the language question. I mean, I find that, I'm going to comment on some less salutary experiences, but I find Canadian societies in general very polite and tolerant. And so if I come with an accent, people would smile politely and try to fill in the blanks and make sense of what I say. So I would say that don't ever be apologize for your accent, because that's part of you. But there is a weakness in accent that becomes fatal. When people cannot understand you, then you can claim all the racism you want, but that just certainly won't cut in my Episcopal area. You can speak with an accent, you can have imperfect English, which I still do, but you have to make yourself heard. And the second thing that's very wise in your strategy, and I hope you insist on it, in spite of all the protestation, is I think that, at least speaking for the Chinese community, which I know something about, I think people want to gather with their own people for fellowship. Now, and some people would only want to worship and fellowship in their own language, and that is one kind of ministry. But there's another kind of people that says, I want to have the comfort and support in my mother tongue, but I also want to integrate into what I call mainstream society. And my inkling is that those are the people that are most attracted to a Big Ten church like ours. So there's a mistake if bishops and colleges treat this idea of, we just have different language groups and different language congregations, and we will, import people or ordain people just to serve them. I think that is a kind of marginalization, and it is whatever it is not mission.
Thank you, Bishop. I want to add a few words of what the missional church look like, which I'm trying. It's not exactly, I think in the future, I do believe there's somewhere doing much better. Right now, in my church, we're very international. Because of I counted the Sunday school, we usually have 15, 20 young kids in the Sunday school right now. I counted last week from 7 countries, I believe. So it's from India, from Africa, from China, it's even from different places. So which reflected the first generation, like I'm the first generation, somehow my brain works half, I think even thinking theology, half in Mandarin, the other half English. I don't know what's the portion of that. When I think it's still, inside of struggling there. But for the second, like my son, he was born here. I speak Mandarin, he speaks English back. It's hard to explain in Mandarin. Sometimes I force him to pick up some. But when he mingle with Sunday school, he feel, oh, this is heaven. Because of the teacher speak, it's a kind of English all day. They kind of feel very international. So the church looks like a lot of Mandarin churches, which I know, they trying to drag their kids into no, I don't want to go to the church for speak all the one language, which you are familiar with. I don't even understand, or I don't. So I think we build up a church missional means of we deliver it. We give people, you need some Maryland, we provide some. But for the kids, we're still in the same family in the church. And for the seniors group right now, which is growing in Oak Hill right now, we totally provide Mandarin because of it's hard for them to. We just use their Cantonese, use their mother language, provide the service. We volunteers all help, and so in this way we build the church like a big family, from the seniors, from young families, from the young children. I think this is one of the strengths of a missional church or missional work. I never felt for our church. A lot of people say this, oh, my church is all the seniors people, or our church is the whole family. You can say the church joint attendance is you can feel the drive and the energy there, and even bring the energy to a lot of our senior members. They're very happy about it. They say, oh, this is the future of our church. I can see the church drive there. Yeah, that's something which is a positive feedback we have right now. Is give everyone faith and hope we can carry on.
I think it's a good place to pause and see if there's any questions. Yes, sir.
Thank you so much for allowing me to speak in this seminar. And my name is Pierre. I'm Father Pierre, and I'm recently settled into Canada. And I was very, very pleased to be here in this season, because I came last year in September. So this season is a season where we can now think more that I and my family is the second winter we are experiencing in this Canada. So for Father Garf, I used to communicate when I was back in Africa, and I didn't know him, but the mission is so wonderful. The mission is connecting people in God's mission, right? And as he was talking about how the mission works in his diocese, in his parish, is so wonderful. I was really appreciative, and because as one, I was a priest at parish, and I also did mission and outreach, which was very, very significant for the church, even outside. So today's mission, as I can say here in Canada, I don't know much in terms of the area, but the mission remains mission, because we are in God's mission. And then as he talks about how to reach out the youth, the children, and it helps and impacts the church as well. And as he was talking about how to reach out. Back home, I used to deal with a project called Bible Study Community, which was more involved to do outreach. Different parishes was connecting just to help people to understand more. First about Bible study, and second thing is how to connect and know how the families are doing in terms of their lifestyle and how they move. So if I come back to how he's like implementing this project towards the new immigrants, like it's very important. Like 2 years back, I was back in Uganda where I was there as a refugee, and I and my wife, we were refugees, but at the same time we were ministers, and all those people we were in a critical situation, they were looking towards us. So as people, as leaders, so what were we doing to help those people? How can we just reach out and talk to them about Jesus in such a wounded history? So it's a really challenging situation when you are addressing area to some immigrants that you don't know sometimes their background, but to listen to them. But the part of it is the healing process to help them as a church, as missionary. And I'm so really appreciating your mission, and it will be helping for the church and the community as well, just within Canada and even abroad. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you. What a wonderful insight. And first of all, sorry for the snow. 2 winters and you stayed, so all the power with you. But to share in that ministry in a refugee camp, as you described it, is, I think, beyond what I could imagine personally. But as you point out, lots of people new to this country have very different experiences than many people that have spent most of their lifetime here. And I think we need to listen to those stories. And it's part of what's happening, and I suspect it's part of where God's guiding us. Any feedback from the two of you?
Thank you, Father. Your name is
Father Pierre.
Pierre.
Yeah.
I think we Facebook text each other.
Yeah.
Today we just realized, we meet in person.
Yeah,
finally.
exactly.
So thank you for sharing about that. And I think it's for the missional work. The good thing is it's a step out of your your mother language or family. Some hold the narrow theology or narrow zone of the only serve one kind of people. So in my church right now, we used to have a food bank program. It's called Nurturing Neighbors. Mm-hmm. Before that, I think before I moved to the St. Luke's, I don't believe there's especially Chinese congregation. They serve outside of other, it's especially a Chinese group. They mingle together. But I invited them in, which serves, especially pandemic, we serve from 30 families. Now, I think close to 120 families. Every week, they pick up food from them. And the volunteers group we recruited, we keep growing because 120 families, they come every Thursday afternoon. They need the food to be prepared. They need, sometimes we cook a meal, give them. And the people from the 120 families, some people, they don't even speak English. Muslim, from the Russian, from Arabic, from Africa, from everywhere. And this way of, I find that it's educational for the missional work, also for the originally they call it the Chinese congregation, and they find this is a great opportunity to serve. And the Ukraine war started, right? The whole congregation, I called them, I think, okay, we need to do something to support. Quite a few people asked me or put the stuff in the church, and which we brought to one of the Ukraine church in the town. Mm-hmm. So for example, like in the future, if there's I think the situation, this is how the Christian, I think how God called us to do. We help each other, we serve each other, we connect each other through the vine. So I think this is a kind of a beauty part of missional work in the future, we connect each other through this way. So that's a light.
I love hearing from you, Garfield, about the ministry that you're doing. I think one of the things that I'm keeping my eye particularly on with this missioner network and the work that you're doing and hoping to connect with people across the country is this, there's a new thing here. I mean, in a lot of ways, a lot of what we're trying to do through mission is about getting back to what the church was supposed to be doing all along. But what I mean by a new thing is this idea that, particularly here in Canada, but in other parts of the world now, we have such diversity of people groups, cultures, languages, backgrounds, stories of refugees and of trauma that people have fled and so forth. So, I mean, if I think about the Orthodox Church that's in Toronto, right? I mean, there's more than 60 parishes here. A couple of them use English in the main, right? The vast majority of them are ethnic enclaves, right, where they are only even thinking. If they thought of mission, they're only thinking about looking through the phone book for certain last names, right? And I'm just inspired by the fact that at St. Luke's you're knocking on doors, and it doesn't matter who is behind the door. You're welcoming them into the church. They're not necessarily Anglican or Christian by background, but they're welcome, right? But what that even looks like, I think we're only beginning to kind of figure out, right? And the fact that you're not saying, well, the way to reach out to Chinese people is to set up Chinese churches. The way to reach out to Indian people is to set up Indian churches. Or we need to have more of those black churches. Now, I understand why historically those evolved, right? And often it was to protect and secure groups that were being marginalized and oppressed and put, outside of what was the labelless Christianity. Was just simply a label that was hidden, right, of white European, Christianity and so forth. But what that even looks like in the future, when a missioner network is successful and missioners are in full speed and churches are growing and developing and everything, what does it even looks like on the ground to have churches where people come and are part of this wonderful mystery of diversity that St. Paul talks about in Ephesians chapter 3, that will be a sign to those in the heavenly places of that eschatological reality of the church of the age to come. I think that's the most exciting part about this, is that we haven't yet seen that. In theory, throughout church history, churches have been diverse, but they've been in places where people all look the same and talk the same and everything, right? But now Toronto is the most diverse place on earth, as far as I'm aware. What does it look like to churches here? And I love the idea that those can be multi-ethnic, multicultural, multilingual, but somehow, that differentiated unity, the unified diversity that we need to achieve. But it seems like that's embedded in your plans. I hope I'm reflecting that well in what I'm saying. But the fact that it's not just these projects to kind of create these other enclaves or whatever, to me is one of the most inspiring parts of it. It's hard work, it's the hardest thing we're called to do, but yet it is God's work and eschatological work of this differentiated unity and unified diversity. So I don't know, that's less of a question than a kind of rant, but
it's a good observation, and I think it's an important observation to make, because in some ways we're finding it out as we're going along, and not that things change, but our understanding of what's going on is changing. And you've identified some key platforms along the way, and in terms of what's working, what's not working, and the context and reality that we're in. And context does matter. Anything to add?
A couple of things. I think that it seems to me that for the church to retool itself, I think we need at least two kinds of gene therapy. The first gene therapy is to clarify what the business of the church is. And I would submit that from different sources that making Christians is fairly close to what our core business is. And in time it became other things. It became a music society or debating society or whatever, or moralistic society. And I don't know what that that our colleges are prepared to do that, and with all the great respect to our wonderful professors, they have chosen to specialize in certain areas, and usually evangelism is not one of them. You know, so people like Garfield, to incorporate them not as kind of, you know, on the margin. You know, evangelism is good for people who like that sort of thing, but rather core. So I think that until I retire, every postulant in the Diocese of Toronto must spend a weekend with me, and we talk about evangelism.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I think I don't know whether they do that anymore, but it would be a wonderful irony if Trinity started that every graduate have to, or MDiv student have to have some kind of exposure to evangelism. I think the second gene is, I mean, even with our talk about this inclusive church, look at who's around. I mean, you have Garfield talking about ministry, and you've met me, ethnic people. And I think that for too long, we are happy that we have different language based congregations, just as you pointed out earlier. But I've heard of people who came from India or China or the Ukraine, and they moved into ministry in English-speaking congregation, and that's supposed to be inclusion. I have not yet heard about people who graduate with the MDiv degree and say, you know what, I'm going to minister to a Tamil congregation, and I will learn a few Tamil words, and I will speak it horribly, but I want to make it not just my goal, but even a possibility. And unfortunately, I do not see that passion. As a matter of fact, I do not see any passion to move outside of Steeles Avenue. So this kind of culture of what ministry is all about is another gene therapy we need to pay attention to.
And I thought it was hard work before. Thank you.
Well,
But you're hang on to something, definitely.
You can retire too at a future point.
God willing. Any other questions? Or statements or reflections back? Because we're at the end of our material. I do think this fits in with Reimagining Contemporary Ministries so well. I think there's a certain excitement and energy that comes with this project, and God willing, in a year we can report back about some positive relationships built and some learning that we've made together. I think that's really our goal.
Do you want to just mention the website and conference as things?
So there is a website. I haven't gotten it written down, but if you're
missionernetwork.ca.
missionernetwork.ca. If you're watching this after the fact, you're probably on the website, because that's how you will access it. And we will work towards a conference in the new year where we bring together those things I talked about, from worship and its challenges to finding space to children's ministry to stewardship. And have I missed anything else?
I don't think so.
Thank you. And thank you to Jeffrey and your new role here at Trinity, and the leadership you provided, and the opportunity to walk with Trinity as we go down this new pathway. And can I tell Bishop Patrick Wu that I preach evangelism at Trinity College, and there's been many students that have taken it, so it's not all dark and not all lost.
Lovely.
And in fact, I would say that every course I offer is evangelistic in its tone and nature and telos. So, I mean, I think that's what we have to embed it in. It's not just a weekend. I mean, all credit to you for doing a weekend with people, but it's got to be embedded from every aspect of it. Because you're right, our business is evangelism and discipleship, formation for the kingdom. So.
And I like the question, because what is our business? You go to IKEA and you go there to buy furniture. People show up in the church and we don't talk about God. You know?
Every fourth Tuesday.
Every fourth Tuesday.
Yeah. It's incredible.
Right.
And then one of my little anecdotes always is, I remember the Winners opened up the street from St. Simon's, and I went there and had great deals, and I told 5 people, it's great deals, you've got to go to the Winners. And then I thought afterwards, have I said anything nice about people to my church that I've enjoyed it? And I used it in a sermon. I'm like, you don't have to tell them you went and heard a good sermon, but say we had, a nice Bible study or a nice church supper, or they had good cake at coffee hour. Say something positive about it.
Don't they tell you they heard a good sermon from another church?
Okay, that's true.
I want to add something. I didn't know how the thing's going to go. There was this question about waves of immigration. I'm not going to touch that this time. But I just want to say that what we do in our colleges and our churches are really important. If I had time, I'd talk about how every wave of Chinese that come in have met with its corresponding resistance. So the current wave would be from Hong Kong. And so I think that how we treat our immigrant neighbors are really important, not just for the church, but also for society. I'm completely disturbed by the rhetoric, the anti-Chinese rhetoric that's around in the news media. I have family in the United States, and the fear and the discrimination they face are unbelievable. And I do not believe that Canada is a better place. I think it's just smaller and less powerful. So if we do not pay attention and practice a little bit of critical thinking with the news portrayal, then we would be part of the danger that may end up in a world war. So I think that when we practice peacemaking and reconciliation and listening in our churches, it has an effect in society. Just want to add that.
That's very important.
A final thought, Garfield, or should we conclude? I think we conclude. Thank you for having us, and thank you to Garfield and Bishop Wu for wonderful insight. I think everyone will really appreciate it, so thank you so much.